Wasps, an original short story by Miss Worm. It was the hottest summer on record, so they said, and I could well believe it. He spent most of it lying in the garden, in his green football shirt, slowly cooking himself like an early Christmas turkey basted in cheap lager. But as long as the beer was in steady supply, he was docile, and lucky for me, his fists were too. One day, at the end of June, hotter even than the days before, I was topping up the bird bath when I spotted a wasp struggling in the water. It had fallen in, poor thing, and I rushed to find a stick to help it out.
Just kill it, you silly cow. They're a bloody nuisance.
I can't. They have such little time, only days really, and it's not up to me to play God. I fished the wasp out and helped it onto a leaf. One crooked antenna hung uselessly at the side of its head. "Poor you," I whispered.
There's a nest in the loft,
he said, and a sneer came over his drunken face.
I'll go up and kill 'em later.
The nest had been there all summer without bothering us, and I knew he was only saying it to upset me. But the more I thought about those lives, those fleeting, work-filled lives, the more I pleaded with him. His temper fermented in the unrelenting heat, bubbling up and frothing, until he dragged me indoors, pushing me up the ladder into the attic, keen for me to witness his petty destruction. It was stifling up there, a pitch-black, hellish oven, as if something had sucked all the oxygen away, and the roasting darkness pressed against me like a threatening, inescapable blanket.
Come here, you.
He shoved me against the wall.
I'll show you who's God in this house.
He staggered, half crouching, between the joists and beams, and shone his torch at the nest. I grabbed his arm, and his hand scraped against the joist. A fat splinter pierced his flesh, and the wood disappeared deep into his skin. He pulled it out, and a drop of blood, almost black in the gloom, splattered against the nest. Instantly I knew what was coming. His fist smashed into the side of my head, and 1,000 glowing stars lit up the attic. A wave of nausea overtook me, and I hung my head low, battling against the sickness. My gaze fell upon his old hockey stick lying at my feet, so I picked it up, and I hit him. And I kept on hitting him. I lay in bed that night and stared at the ceiling. The windows were open wide, and there was no avoiding the heat. I ignored the soft buzzing at first, but as it drew closer, I turned over. A wasp had settled on his pillow, and as it crawled towards me, I laughed like I hadn't done in years. But he couldn't stay up there forever, not in this heat. The neighbours were bound to notice the smell. Ugh, supposing he seeped through the ceiling. It took 2 days for me to screw up my courage, and then, armed with a roll of bin bags and the electric carving knife, I lifted the hatch, expecting the stench of rotting meat to strike me. Nothing. I took off my COVID mask and stuck my head through the hatchway. Not even a hint. Christ! Was he still alive? I ducked down in alarm, and the loft hatch slammed. No, he couldn't be. But if he was... I gripped the carving knife and forced myself back up the ladder into the sweltering black void. The wasps droned in the shadows, and my rapid heartbeats formed a rhythm with them. I saw his foot first, lying at a weird angle with the shoe half off. A single wasp crawled across his sock. Sweat drenched my back, and my fingers shook as I clamped my mask closer to my face. Slowly, I swung the torch further up his body, expecting him to be nothing but putrefying meat alive with maggots. The buzz of the wasps intensified as the light hit them, but they didn't come near me. They were too busy eating what was left of him. I noticed a new sound, gnawing. They were stripping his skin from the bones, one minuscule mouthful at a time. They'd made short work of his arms. Patches of bone glinted white in the torchlight, and the sleeves of his t-shirt twitched and writhed as they hurried back and forth, seeking any tiny morsel of flesh they'd missed. They swarmed over his head 10 deep or more, until there was just a seething mass of bodies where there had once been a face, where there had once been eyes, a nose, a mouth. Had he been dead when the first wasp had ventured into his nostrils? Or had he felt, in the twilight of his consciousness, hundreds of industrious feet scratching their way upwards into his soft, moist brain? My knees buckled at that, and I sat on the floor with a thump. As I did so, my torchlight landed on the nest. It was just paper and wood, for the most part, all except the central chamber, which had a bright green lining. It was then that I saw her, the Queen, watching me from high up on one of the joists. She was 3 inches long, with one crooked, useless antenna. "Thank you," I whispered. For nearly a month I listened to them. Their constant murmuring lulled me to sleep at night, and during the day I watched them in the garden. Some evenings I went up into the attic and kept them company. I marvelled as entire generations fed on him. The Queen flourished, and soon she was the length and breadth of my forearm, and by the end of the month she was 2 feet long and almost as tall. There was not much left of him by then, and a new problem confronted me. At first I bought them pork from the supermarket, but it never satisfied them for long, and they became more demanding as the Queen grew. She'd knock on the loft hatch, tap, 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 to let me know when they were hungry. It was happening more and more. On quiet nights I heard her feet skittering across the attic floor. She'd pause above my bed, and I wondered, sometimes, if I would ever end up as lunch. Something would have to be done. Just before Christmas, I switched on the news. A police inspector looked into the camera.
"Thank you. Our officers have been very successful in ridding the town of drug dealers,"
he said. And I laughed like I haven't laughed in months.